In the late 1990s, a man walked into a video rental store, returned a copy of Apollo 13, and was told he owed $40. $40. For a movie that cost about $3 to rent, he paid it. He walked out. And he was embarrassed enough that he didn't want to tell his wife. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. You forget a tape, you pay the fee, you feel stupid for a day, then move on. But Reed Hastings didn't move on. Because on the drive home, he started asking a question that was much more dangerous than it sounded. Not, how do I avoid this fee next time? But, why is an entire industry built on punishing its own customers? That question became Netflix. Netflix killed Blockbuster. It changed how the world watches television. It dragged Hollywood into the streaming era, forced every major studio to copy its model, and today the company is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. All from one late fee, one annoyed customer, one question the industry had stopped asking. This is the story of how Reed Hastings turned $40 into a global empire. Not by getting lucky, but by reinventing Netflix 3 separate times. First, the way movies were delivered, then the way customers paid, and finally, the way entertainment itself was made. Each shift made Netflix stronger. Each one also could have killed the company. So to understand how it happened, we have to go back to a world where watching a movie at home was much harder than pressing play. To understand why Netflix was such a radical idea, you have to remember what renting a movie looked like in the 1990s. You didn't open an app. You didn't scroll through recommendations. You got in your car, drove to a strip mall, walked into a store that smelled like popcorn and plastic, and wandered the aisles, hoping the new release you wanted was still there. If it was gone, that was it. You compromised. You picked something else. You went home with a movie you didn't really want because the movie you came for was sitting in someone else's living room, and sitting on top of that entire system was Blockbuster. Blockbuster wasn't just big, it was the category. At its peak, it had more than 9,000 stores around the world, tens of thousands of employees, and a brand so dominant that renting a movie and going to Blockbuster basically meant the same thing. They had the locations. They had the studio relationships. They had the customer habit. And most importantly, they had a business model that seemed impossible to beat. But there was one ugly detail hiding inside that model. Blockbuster didn't just make money when people rented movies. It made a huge amount of money when people forgot to return them. Late fees were not a side effect. They were part of the machine. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year came from customers slipping up. The more disorganized you were, the more Blockbuster earned. Think about how strange that is. A company's profit was tied to its customers feeling guilty, annoyed, and a little embarrassed. The longer you forgot, the better the business did. And nobody really questioned it. That was just how renting movies worked. You wanted the movie, you accepted the rules. But that's exactly the kind of market where disruption begins. Not because nobody sees the problem, but because everyone has lived with it so long they stop recognizing it as a problem. Then Reed Hastings got hit with the fee. The way Hastings tells the story, he had rented Apollo 13, Tom Hanks, NASA, the whole thing. And somewhere between watching it and life getting busy, he forgot to return it. By the time he found the tape, it was 6 weeks overdue. The fine was around $40, and what bothered him wasn't really the money. Hastings already had money. He'd sold a software company. $40 wasn't going to change his life. What bothered him was the feeling. He felt stupid. He felt embarrassed. He didn't want to tell his wife that he had somehow turned a cheap movie rental into a $40 mistake, so he's driving to the gym thinking about this ridiculous little fine, and the question starts to change. At first it's personal. Why did this happen to me? Why did I forget? Why am I paying this much for a movie I already watched? But then it becomes structural. Why does this fee exist at all? What if renting movies worked more like a gym membership? You pay a flat monthly fee. You use it as much as you want. No due dates, no penalties, no anxiety. You pay for access, not for mistakes. Now the late fee story has become part of Netflix mythology. And like most founder stories, it has probably been polished over time. Hastings himself has said it functions more as a useful illustration than a perfect lightning bolt moment. But the insight is what matters. The most valuable thing in a market is not always a new technology. Sometimes it's a pain point so normal that everyone has forgotten it can be removed. And Hastings saw it. But seeing a pain point is the easy part. Building a company around it takes a very specific kind of person. Because the late fee story makes Hastings sound like a regular guy who got annoyed and stumbled into a billion-dollar idea. He wasn't. Reed Hastings was a math guy. He studied mathematics at Bowdoin, spent 2 years in the Peace Corps teaching high school math in Swaziland, and then went to Stanford for a master's in computer science. By the time the Apollo 13 fine happened, he was not just a frustrated customer with a clever complaint. He had already built and sold a company. His first major venture was Pure Software, a debugging tools company he founded in 1991. He ran it for 6 years, took it public, and eventually sold it for around $750 million. So when Hastings looked at the video rental industry, he didn't see it the way someone inside Blockbuster saw it. He didn't see stores, shelves, posters, and teenagers behind a counter. He saw a system, inputs, outputs, logistics, incentives, customer behavior. And he saw a business model that was misaligned with the people paying for it. That matters because misalignment is the kind of thing an engineer can't unsee. If the system rewards the company when the customer fails, then the system is broken. And if the system is broken, there might be a business in fixing it. So the $40 didn't create Netflix by itself. It was the spark. Hastings already had the fuel, capital, technical skill, operating experience, and the ability to look at an old industry as if it were a design problem. In 1997, he lit the match. Netflix launched in 1997, and the first version of the idea was almost laughably simple. Instead of opening stores, Netflix would mail you DVDs. That was it. You went to the website, picked a movie, and a few days later, a red envelope arrived at your house. You watched the disc, put it back in the prepaid envelope, dropped it in the mailbox, and waited for the next one. At the time, this sounded strange, maybe even absurd. Why would anyone wait for a movie in the mail when they could just drive to Blockbuster and get one tonight? But under the surface, the idea was clever. The first reason was the DVD itself. DVDs had just arrived, and they were nothing like VHS tapes. A VHS tape was bulky, heavy, and expensive to ship. A DVD was small and light. You could mail it across the country for almost nothing. Suddenly, the math worked. The second reason was the cost structure. Netflix didn't need stores, no retail leases, no store managers, no rows of inventory spread across thousands of locations. A warehouse could serve an entire region. The company could operate with a fraction of Blockbuster's physical overhead. But clever does not mean inevitable. In 1997 and 1998, this model was barely viable. Most people still didn't own DVD players. Broadband was rare. A lot of customers were still on dial-up. Ordering things online felt risky to normal people. Netflix was betting on a future that was visible, but not yet here. So yes, DVDs by mail were smart, but they were not enough. Mailing discs might lower costs, but it did not yet transform the emotional experience of renting a movie. To beat Blockbuster, Netflix needed to do more than send movies differently. It needed to make renting feel different. That's where the second shift comes in, the shift that made Netflix truly dangerous. In 1999, Netflix did something that looks obvious now, but was radical at the time. It threw out the parental model. Instead of paying every time you rented a movie, customers paid one flat monthly fee. You could keep a DVD as long as you wanted. When you sent it back, Netflix sent the next one from your list. No due dates, no late fees, no guilt. Ever. This was the real breakthrough. Because Netflix didn't just make renting more convenient. It deleted the most hated part of the experience, The small anxiety in the back of your mind, the clock ticking, the feeling that if life got busy, the company would punish you for it. Gone. But the deeper genius was not emotional. It was structural. Under Blockbuster's model, the company made money when you messed up. The longer you held the movie, the more they earned. Their incentives were quietly opposed to yours. Under Netflix's model, that flipped. Netflix only made money if you kept subscribing next month. And the month after that, and the month after that. Which meant Netflix had to make the service feel worth keeping. That changed everything. Suddenly, Netflix cared about getting you the right movie faster. It cared about recommendations. It cared about shipping speed. It cared about whether you felt you were getting enough value every month. The business was no longer built around the penalty. It was built around retention. That's the moment Netflix stopped being just a video rental company. It became a membership business. The DVD was not the real product anymore. The relationship was the product. And once Netflix understood that, all the metrics changed. Instead of maximizing revenue per rental, it obsessed over churn. Instead of hoping customers forgot to return movies, it wanted them to feel good enough to stay. Instead of profiting from friction, it had to remove friction. Netflix was selling the feeling of unlimited entertainment without punishment. And once customers experienced that, going back to Blockbuster felt worse, not just less convenient, worse. But here's the part that makes the story more interesting. Even with a brilliant model, Netflix was still fragile. It was still burning cash. It was still small. And very soon, Reed Hastings would try to sell the whole thing to the company he would later destroy. In the year 2000, Reed Hastings got on a plane to Dallas. He was going to meet John Antioco, the CEO of Blockbuster. And he was going there to sell Netflix. At that point, Netflix was not the unstoppable company we know today. It was a startup with a promising idea and a lot of problems. The dot-com bubble had burst. Investors were nervous. The DVD by mail model was growing, but it still wasn't profitable. The future was far from guaranteed. So Hastings made an offer. Blockbuster could buy Netflix for $50 million. Netflix would become Blockbuster's online business. Hastings and his team would handle digital. Blockbuster would keep running the stores. On paper, it made sense. Blockbuster had the brand and the customers. Netflix had the online model. Together, they could have owned the future. But Blockbuster said no. The executives reportedly almost laughed him out of the room. $50 million for a tiny mail-order DVD company that wasn't even making money? Why would Blockbuster need that? Hastings flew home empty-handed. That meeting is now one of the most famous missed opportunities in business history. Because if Blockbuster had said yes, Netflix as we know it probably would not exist. It might have become a tab on Blockbuster's website, a small online feature attached to a much bigger retail machine. Instead, the rejection forced Netflix to keep going alone. And the company Blockbuster didn't want to buy eventually buried it. So the question is, how? How did the tiny company nobody want to beat the giant with every advantage? Because Blockbuster was not stupid. It had money, customers, stores, relationships, and brand power. It should have crushed Netflix, but it didn't. Look at Blockbuster around 2003 or 2004. On paper, the company was untouchable. It had the brand. Everyone knew the name. It had thousands of stores around the world. It had tens of millions of customers. It had long-standing studio relationships. It had cash flow. It had Hollywood influence. It had the supply chain. Netflix had a warehouse, a website, and a much smaller customer base. By any normal business logic, Blockbuster should win. But normal business logic is exactly what trapped it. This is the innovator's dilemma. When a company becomes extremely good at one model, that model becomes a cage. Every profit target, every employee's job, every executive bonus, every investor expectation depends on the existing system continuing to work. So when the future arrives, the company can see it. But fully embracing it means damaging the thing that is currently making money. That was Blockbuster's problem. It could not easily kill late fees because late fees were too profitable. It could not shut down stores fast enough because the stores were the brand. It could not fully commit to online rentals because online rentals threatened the stores. Even when Blockbuster tried to move, the old model pulled it back. John Antioco pushed to eliminate late fees in 2005, and his own board resisted because those fees mattered too much to the economics of the business. The company knew customers hated them, but knowing the problem and being able to remove it are not the same thing. Netflix had none of that baggage. It had no stores to protect, no late fees to mourn, no decades-old culture telling it how the rental business was supposed to work. It could build for the future because it had no past to defend. That is the real lesson of disruption. Giants usually don't lose because they are blind. They lose because they are tied to what made them giants. They can see the new model coming. They have analysts, consultants, internal memos, strategy decks. They know the threat exists. But acting on it means hurting today's business for tomorrow's opportunity. And most companies wait too long. Netflix didn't have that luxury. It had to move forward because forward was the only direction available. But even after beating Blockbuster's model, Netflix was not safe because the next decision Hastings made was far more dangerous. This time, Netflix would have to disrupt itself. By 2007, Netflix had built a real business. The DVD-by-mail model was no longer a weird experiment. Millions of subscribers were using it. The red envelopes had become iconic. Blockbuster was under pressure. Netflix was winning. This is the moment most companies become defensive. They protect the model. They optimize it. They tell themselves, this business can last for years. Let's not mess it up. Hastings looked at the same business and decided to start killing it because he could see what was coming. Internet speeds were improving. Bandwidth was getting cheaper. Computers were becoming better media devices. Sooner or later, people would not want to wait for a disc in the mail. They would want to press play and watch instantly. And when that moment arrived, the company that owned the instant experience would own the future of home entertainment. The problem was that streaming threatened Netflix's own core business. Every customer who moved to streaming was one less customer depending on DVDs. Netflix would be spending money to build the thing that made its red envelopes less important. That is a brutal decision for any CEO. The pain is immediate. The payoff is uncertain. The existing business is real. The future is still a bet. But Hastings made the bet. In 2007, Netflix launched streaming, and over the next several years, the company pushed harder and harder toward it, even when it complicated the business, pressured margins, and changed what Netflix had been built to do. This is the difference between Netflix and Blockbuster in one decision. Blockbuster was loyal to its product, physical stores. Netflix was loyal to the customer behavior, watching movies at home with as little friction as possible. When the technology changed, Blockbuster tried to preserve the old behavior. Netflix followed the customer into the new one. That's why the DVD business was never the point. It was a bridge, a very profitable, very important bridge, but still a bridge. And once Netflix crossed it, the company discovered something even bigger. Streaming was not just a better delivery method. It was a different industry. And in that industry, being the pipe, it would not be enough. For the first few years of streaming, Netflix had a simple job: license movies and TV shows from studios, put them on the platform, and charge a subscription. It was a distributor, a pipe. It did not make the water, it just delivered it. But as Netflix got bigger, the studios started to notice what was happening. They looked at Netflix and thought, why are we letting this company make billions from our content? Why are we giving it the customer relationship? Why don't we build our own streaming platforms and keep the value ourselves? Once that question entered the room, Netflix had a problem. If Disney pulled its catalog, if HBO walked away, if NBC, Fox, Sony, and everyone else decided to keep their shows for themselves, Netflix could be left with a beautiful platform and an empty library. A pipe without water is worthless. So Netflix made another bet. If the studios were eventually going to take their content back, Netflix had to become a studio itself. In 2013, Netflix released House of Cards. It cost around $100 million. It was a huge risk for a company that had never really produced television at that level before. And it worked. House of Cards won Emmys. It earned the kind of prestige people did not expect from a streaming platform. It proved Netflix could make television that belonged in the same conversation as HBO, AMC, and the best traditional networks. It also proved something else. Netflix could use its data in a way traditional studios could not. It knew what people watched, when they paused, what they binged, what they abandoned, and what kept them subscribed. That didn't make creative decisions automatic, but it gave Netflix a different map of audience behavior, and that map became a weapon. From there, the floodgates opened. Stranger Things, The Crown, Narcos, Squid Game, a Korean series that became a global phenomenon in a way the old Hollywood model would have struggled to produce, distribute, and scale. Netflix was no longer just renting access to other people's stories. It was making its own. In dozens of languages, across more than 190 countries, for hundreds of millions of subscribers. Step back and the arc is almost absurd. A man gets fined $40 at a video store. He builds a DVD by mail company. He turns it into a subscription service. He survives being rejected by Blockbuster. He outlasts the giant. He undermines his own DVD business to bet on streaming. Then he turns that streaming business into one of the most powerful entertainment studios on the planet. That is not luck. That is a pattern. So what is the actual lesson here? Because if we reduce this story to guy gets fined, guy builds empire, we miss almost everything important. The first lesson is that small pain points can reveal huge business models. The $40 was never really about $40. It was a signal. It showed that an entire industry had built part of its economics around customer frustration, and customers had simply accepted it. Some of the biggest opportunities hide inside things people complain about once, then tolerate forever. The second lesson is that disruption does not start with technology. It starts with a better customer experience. Netflix did not beat Blockbuster because it had DVDs, or because it had the internet, or even because it had streaming. Those were tools. Netflix won because it removed friction. It removed punishment. It made the experience feel better. The technology changed over time, but the core idea stayed the same. Make entertainment easier to access and less annoying to pay for. The third lesson is that the most powerful companies are the ones willing to disrupt themselves before someone else does. Netflix killed its dependence on stores before it ever had stores. Then it weakened its own DVD business to chase streaming. Then it weakened its dependence on outside studios by becoming one. Most companies struggle to do this once. Netflix did it again and again. And the fourth lesson is the one that matters most. Blockbuster did not lose because it couldn't see the future. It saw enough of it. It had the chance to buy Netflix. It had the resources to compete. It had the customers, the brand, the stores, and the studio relationships. It lost because it could not let go of the model that was still making it rich. Its strength became its cage. Reed Hastings didn't just turn $40 into hundreds of billions. He took a small customer frustration, that embarrassed, annoyed, I don't want to tell my wife feeling, and built a system around respecting it. That was the real product. Not DVDs, not streaming, not original shows. Respect. The idea that a business should align itself with the customer instead of quietly betting against them. Everything else came from that. If you like stories about how one small idea reshapes an entire industry, subscribe, because that's what this channel is about. Next, you might want to watch how Blockbuster missed Netflix from the inside, how Amazon turned books into a global empire, or how YouTube quietly changed television without asking permission. And before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Which company today looks the most like Blockbuster in the early 2000s? A giant with every advantage, every resource, every relationship, and a future it might be too comfortable to chase? Drop your answer below. I read them. I'll see you in the next one.